topic says plea bargains. Know the pros and cons and your rights. This session is to be moderated by none other than our criminal justice chair, that's Reverend Dr. David Fox, and he's going to introduce his guests, and we're going to get right engaged into this conversation. Reverend Fox.
Thank you, President Ford. I'm just excited that I have three of the most talented men in the city. Or, then again, I don't know. But nevertheless, these gentlemen here represent very knowledgeable individuals that deal with criminal justice activities. You got all the way to our far right, magistrate and acting judge, and this guy here, he was here last year and folks were saying, this is an attorney, Michael Plea. And these brothers say, well, why don't I preach here? Well, he's very much in the criminal justice system. Matter of fact, he did a project, very interesting project, dealing with why blacks are being kept off juries. And the reason why I brought him on board is because he's going to bring it from a different perspective. And anytime that anyone has a question, just raise your hand. It's kind of like a little coaching session, and we'll have a conversation. Actually, we just want to have a conversation. And I really want to have a conversation over him because in his doctoral dissertation project, on page 23, he wrote something very interesting. And he was talking about prosecutorial misconduct. And he wrote that one of the factors that is a problem is plea bargaining as far as prosecutorial misconduct. So I want you to expound on that a little bit.
Thank you, Dr. Fox, and greetings to everyone. I'm glad that there are experts on the panel tonight, so because my perspective is I'm just running my mouth. All right. But I do believe that everyone who desires to speak should be heard. And so I speak from a passion of people for people, and that's what drives me and drove me to my work on why there's an absence of African Americans on the American jury. And what I discovered in my research is that it's not just an absence of African Americans. Systematically, African Americans throughout history have been left off the jury, stuck on the jury, all the welcome to the jury pool to look at and to present itself as if we're doing our due diligence. But when the pool is shaken down to the actual people who would actually sit on the trial when the defendants are African Americans, it shifts significantly. But that's not really the argument. I personally believe that when you for sure is that the plea agreement is not designed, in my opinion, to benefit the community, the people. The plea agreement is designed to benefit the system. And what it does is it gives the system an opportunity to get the numbers right in convictions or people agreeing to settle for charges. It only benefits, in my opinion, people who are actually guilty of a crime. But the problem is that there's so many people that get ensnared by our criminal justice system who are not criminals, who have committed no crimes, and oftentimes have never committed a crime or did anything of the sort or never been caught. You know, all of us may have done something along the way that could be considered a criminal act, especially in this climate. Right? You can jaywalk, and many of us in here jaywalk. And you could be involved in a altercation or an encounter with a law enforcement officer. And so at that moment, the case against you can be built up into, you could be the worst criminal on the face of the earth just from that moment. And so now you resisted arrest and you hit a police officer because you backed into him. That's an assault on a police officer. And all of these other things that can be formulated throughout this one little encounter with a law enforcement officer. And so you got a great record of being an upstanding citizen. But during that situation, perhaps an officer did something wrong. If an officer hits you, right, or does anything that violates his or her oath of office, typically if they put their hands on you, you got to go to jail. You got to, especially if it's on body. You got to go to jail. You have got to be responsible for this. You got to go in there and give an answer for it. And so now you assault the police officer and you've done all of this, and you know, jaywalk, you resisted arrest, and all these different things that are going to come up. Typically, the prosecutor, you know, works with the system. And so you're guilty of all of this stuff. And so the only way out for you is to say you did something in many cases that you did not do. You did not do. You really, in most times, it's all these type of things happen to the underprivileged in poor communities. And these are things that I know are factual because I've heard and been on panels with law enforcement officers talking about when I'm forced to make an arrest. I go to the poor, the lower, underdeveloped communities where people have no power. And I get my arrest, and I do. These were a panel of officers out of New York who were pretty much fed up with what they had to do to be considered good officers. And so the plea bargain, I call it in that work a double-edged sword. It's good because it'll allow you to go home, but it does nothing to really address the fact that you shouldn't be in the situation that you're in. It does nothing to really address that fact. And so my thinking is that if we really want to address the plea bargain, we have to really address the criminal justice system altogether. So that, for me, personally, and that's the only person I can speak for, I think that I would rather 10 guilty people or 100 guilty people go free than one innocent person get trapped in a situation where you have to go to a penitentiary. You have to lose your freedom, your life, your livelihood, and all the things that go along with that, be separated from your family. I'd rather you go free if you have not committed a crime. And so our problem is not so much as the plea bargain, it's the system that has been put in place that locks or traps innocent people in that box to where you have to say, I'm guilty. And once you say you're guilty, you're guilty. Thank you. You got pros.
Well, no, we're not going to play that game. All right. You know, like the gas, you might be able to shoot a chance. No, we're not going to do that. Yeah. But I want to ask an interesting question.
process of plea bargaining is not a constitutional right, or what it is a mechanism that exists in the system. Much of what the Reverend said, quite frankly, plays out on a daily basis. There are a lot of layers, and I think you laid a good foundation cornerstone, and I feel like if we can pick through those layers, we can have a more thorough and, quite frankly, expansive understanding of the system and the plight that the everyday Daytonian, everyday poor person faces in the system. So the first thing I think we talked about was, the plight for the concerns associated with jury trials. So in America, you do have a constitutional right to be judged by your peers. So what exactly does that mean? Well, that means something different depending on who you ask. One thing is for certain, that oftentimes when many people stand accused and they exercise their right to a trial, the people who they have that actually are judging them are not their peers. There are people who come from different circumstances, different backgrounds, in different areas, with lines of different communication, with different education, that have different plights or none at all. And they are asked to assess a situation of a person that they do not know, that they do not understand, from an area that they may never have visited. That creates a multitude of issues right there. The other thing the Reverend talked about is what we call in the legal world a Batson issue. And specifically, we're talking about a jury selection process. Since last summer, I have presided over 8 jury trials. 8 since last summer. And I'm proud to say I feel like those juries have been representative of the community. But then again, that could be because I am representative of my community. When we have different layers of the system, we have to have people who are community conscious to make sure that the safeguards are in place, and watch this, that they are used. Us having systems and safeguards in place that go underutilized or unutilized is no good anymore. And so we have to have people who are conscious to the issues that face people, so that when they see people who stand accused, the people are treated based upon the fact that they are innocent until proven guilty. Oftentimes, depending on where you go, it's the inverse. Now, I believe that's what the Reverend is talking about, the issue. Plea bargainings, I believe, ideally have benefits for all parties, but the person who benefits the most, of course, is going to be the person who actually is guilty. So let's talk about people who are not guilty. Why would someone be compelled to admit guilt to an offense that they did not do? Well, the reasons are numerous. I'm going to give you the top 3 or 5 that come to mind. Okay? Second, this is in a community like ours. We have many different ailments and issues that affect the everyday neighbor, whether it be financial, okay, i.e. meaning that they are hand to mouth, they are unable to provide or find adequate health care, or child care, or transportation. If someone says, hey, if you plead guilty, talk to the court's going to let you out. That person says, oh my goodness, if I don't plead guilty, I'm going to have to stay in jail. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my house. And I could lose my kids. What's more important in this situation, me or my children? Most folks don't say my children, and they're going to do what they need to do to get back to their children. That creates an inherent situation where then you do have a large net that instead of someone who is innocent having a shield, someone who is intending to entreat has a sword. That's an issue. But the fundamental system was built up on principles that, quite frankly, are much similar. Might I need to remind you that we lived not too long ago in a time when we had things that were legally correct, but that were morally wrong. We're still in those times. And that's why I believe that we have to have people who are able to acknowledge, accept, and combat injustice at all levels. So in the criminal justice system, that's what plea bargains come into play. that has clause that move people through in an assembly line fashion, because by definition, that's what a system is. And so to remove those clauses to make the system more personable, I believe it starts with having real meaningful conversations like the one we're having here today. The system is imperfect. The people who are in the system are imperfect. The reason being is that this continues to happen, so you have people who are attempting to try to reach a threshold that completely is not within their reach. None of this stuff is perfect. What is perfect is us together saying, there's an issue, this person's accused of something. If someone's accused of theft, we need to be asking, why are they in a situation where they had to commit an offense? What can we do to give them resources so that they don't commit that offense in the future? Because I guarantee you, all the people who I've ever seen in court, I'm a nice guy. Not one wanted to be in my courtroom. Not one was proud of breaking the law. Many broke the law out of necessity. Because the issue is unchecked, it is actually below the criminal justice system. It's one that, quite frankly, is the root of most of the issues we see at the local court, the streets over. Poverty. We have certain things that happen that only happen in areas where you have poverty. You want to see where crime is? Go to a poor area. Okay? You can call them different things, slums, ghettos, whatever. They're poverty. Also, when you have poverty, you have criminal issues. You also have issues where mental health is exacerbated. You have illiteracy that is magnified. You have low job employment rates. Okay? You have food deserts where you have poverty. Why? Because in areas where you have extensive poverty, you also have hopelessness. If you want to resolve the issues, return to hope.
Oh, awesome. 90% of people in the prisons basically get their plea bargain. That means 10% go to trial. This is the man who defends these people. So talk to us about plea bargain and how you deal with that.
So I don't think most of them are defending all those people in prison. So 90% actually seems like a low number in the system these days. Like a magistrate said, you have a constitutional right to trial. And if all my clients wanted to go to trial, the system would be shut down. There's no resources, there's no people, it's not possible to do. But I agree with Reverend down there that so I've been a part of, I've been a public defender for 15 years. And believe it or not, this man started as a public defender, don't let him ever not bring that out there. Right?
We did cases together, and we won cases together.
Yeah. So I've been a part of thousands of plea works, plea negotiations, pleas in court. I've been a part of, I don't even know how many trials. I try to take things to trial because it is an important part of the process. There are a lot of attorneys that don't do that. But when it leads to prison, so an example came to mind when I was talking just a little bit ago. Within this past week, I spoke to somebody, just got the case recently, and how sentencing laws are some crimes are mandatory prison. There's no way in or out if you're convicted of those crimes. I have a guy right now with no record that's facing 27 years of mandatory prison right now, first offense ever. You know, he calls me up on the phone, I'm talking to him, his words are, I did not do this. And I believe him. And that's the problem where things lie. And I will take it to trial. And there's a lot of emotions that could happen, there's a lot of issues that could happen before the case that could maybe get thrown out. But when it comes down to it, it's their decision. What do you want to do? I never make one decision for one client in my life. I weigh it all out, both sides. I sometimes give recommendations. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but when it comes down to the trial's a week away, and they say, listen, we'll give him this. It's on his plate at that point, you know. I think all my clients realize that if we go to trial, I will do everything I can. I will fight. And that is the fairest trial of all time. But in the end, I can't guarantee what's going to happen when that jury comes back and either says 2 words or 1. And if it comes back I see them overcharged at times. Is it intentional? I'm not part of that process. I don't know. Most prosecutors will see if it's overcharged and handle it at times. But I'm not sure it's an intentional thing. I'm not sure.
You know, that is such a layered question. I can't necessarily say it's intentional. What I often wonder is if the precautions and safeguards that are in place are being exercised to make sure that charges that should not be filed are in fact not filed. I often wonder that, or I often, if they want to add on additional charges later. I do think it is something, you see how these things play out, as Mr. Davis said, it's kind of perplexing to be gentle about it, to see how someone was charged with one or two charges, some things happen, and then all of a sudden there are additional charges that happen thereafter. To say that it's intentional, I can't speculate on that because there are different layers of decision makers that make those decisions. What I can say is that it's thought-provoking. Yes, sir.
It's a two-part thing. Our suggestion on those that have attorney, they can't afford an attorney. Number two is how many are African American in the city?
How many African Americans?
Huh?
You said how many African Americans?
How many Africans are found guilty? And because they come in with no money and you have to get a corny attorney. Okay, how hard is this fight? How many blacks are displaced by this decision?
My decision, so I think the first question I heard, and I'll say it correct me if I'm wrong, you asked how many blacks cannot afford an attorney, right? So, it's hard to say, but I think it's what's that? It's well over 50% of the clients we represent here in Office of County. It is. I think there's a lot of things that lead to that. Now, we're very liberal in accepting clients as public defender clients, so we try to help as many people as we can. But I think a lot of that has to do with there are definitely local policing in certain areas compared to others that lead to more jaywalking tickets, that lead to more things charged, that lead to more resistance. So I think there's a big layer below that too, but I think it's well over 50% of the represent. Your next question was about how many are found guilty, would you say, or?
Yes, and
So, guilty-wise, so once it gets to us, there's a number of diversion programs that have in place. I know the city only does it for pretty much underage drinking, which is usually around the D area, not residency. But that's a thing for another day. When it comes to common pleas and felonies, the lower level ones have diversion. Now, when it goes to the prosecutor's office, they usually don't come. We don't even see those cases unless they say no to that, they kick it out. Now, the problem with diversion to the prosecutor's office, the police officers can object or the complainants can object in those cases. And it's weird, as the police officers don't know why they're going to say and object to the people getting diversion, because it's usually, you can't have a prior record, so it's your first felony.
I know your topic is plea bargaining, but let me ask a multiple question. What role does being in jail play in the plea bargaining process, and what role can the community play in coming up with alternatives, such as what the Montgomery County Jail Coalition is advocating? Okay?
That's a great question. May I add one more before I get to Mr. Roberts' question? This man is not going to brag on himself. I'm going to tell you, him and I, we've been on the same side of the table and represented people's interests. And if I had something that, you know, we found some wood and I on his view, this is who I would call. This man has the heart of a servant, and he is one of the hardest working attorneys that I've known. I see him here. He's had cases in front of me, and I'm telling you, he's solid. That's the truth. Mr. Roberts, you asked a question in reference to what role someone being incarcerated has on, if I may tinker a little bit, the likelihood that they actually enter into plea negotiations and subsequently accept a plea deal. It makes a big difference. Reason being is because oftentimes, for someone to go from, you know, let's say if it's a misdemeanor or, you know, quite frankly, it's a felony, you know, so the range of individual appearance, you know, pre-trials, but the person's incarcerated, you know, during all of these times, then theoretically they have sat in jail, they missed out on paychecks, they missed out on other types of responsibility, they missed out on various things that make not just our lives stable, but those who love lives stable. And so I think that it increases the likelihood that a plea may be induced. And I think this is Reverend's concern about the voluntariness of a plea. One thing that I've always taken great pride in during plea, what we call plea colloquies, is a discussion that the court has with the defendant when they're about to enter a plea, is I'll ask them questions and express to them and let them know that they do have a right to a trial. Also, Mr. Daly and other people from his office are good at filing motions, you know, for example, for bond reviews or bond reductions or electronic home detention. The jail coalition, I believe I've talked on their panels in the past, and I know you've been instrumental in talking about alternatives to incarceration. I believe that we have to open our eyes and be more accepting of one of the fact that when people have earned a second chance post-conviction, that second chance is given without strings. Because if you continue to tell someone who they were, how can they ever become who they should be? So there's that. Pre-conviction, we're talking about electronic home detention, we're talking about COR, so conditional home reconnaissance or home reconnaissance. Maybe a reporter has certain conditions of bond that don't require them posting money. I believe that those things have to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. I'm a big proponent of those things, specifically when we talk about non-violent offenses, when we talk about low-level offenses, when we talk about places where the person can reside pending resolution of the case, that if there's another complaint or another situation. There's so many different factors that come into play, but I do think that those are conversations that have to be had. The role that this organization, and quite frankly, we all can play in this process as concerned citizens is to make sure that when we have those captive audiences, you know, with the attorneys, with the prosecutor, with members of the court, that we let our intentions and desires be known because we're all neighbors. And so people have to know and be heard about those things and also understand the fact that, you know, because most people who go through the system ultimately return back to the community where they resided originally, it only makes sense that we try to stabilize them throughout that trauma that was associated with whether they are convicted or not. I just think it's important that we already start trying to stabilize people sooner rather than later.
I'd like to add to that. We speak in terms of what can we do as a community. I think the number one thing that we can do is we cannot get exhausted to the point that we become inactive and writing you down. Nobody's looking for you anymore. Why? Because that works for the system. And so one of the things that we can do as a community is show up. That's what my whole project, the President Peter project, was about. Show up. Because if you're sitting on that jury, you have a voice. I don't agree with that. We got to start this whole thing over again. Because I don't agree, I don't see it that way. But if you don't show up, and you just let the system run its course. And I always like to leave this. The stuff that happens to guilty people in prisons happens to innocent people. All of the stories we hear about, all of the things that we have learned about. And so it's been masked and this tag has been slapped on everybody in prison, and you got somebody that's been screaming for 15 years, I didn't do it. And we just say, well, that's what they always say.
choice that I had. So the prosecutor needs to be able to tell you. I've done a lot of these talks in my work with criminal justice reform. I have yet to see a prosecutor show up. That's what the problem. These guys, and when you write those plea agreements, they put things in there, because once you agree, then you agree. But they pretty much make it ironclad. So what happened when doctors just like me went before the Supreme Court, who went to prison? I didn't go to prison. And one guy in his life went to prison, because he lost. Well, that's what I was facing. I was not going to protect my wife and my children with that. So I came forward with it. But this guy and two others went before the Supreme Court. Supreme Court reversed it. Said you cannot use, if all this guy did was write prescriptions, he's licensed to do that. You cannot use that as a reason to charge him, because if you write a prescription, he did not know that was committed crime. So they got out. All three of the doctors got out. So then the system should allow that once more information becomes available, whether you keep pardon or not. And I'm told by the parties that be my attorney and even the judge that because I signed the plea agreement, that it was ironclad and I had no option. Even though the Supreme Court said you can't charge this man for this. Like today I would not be charged. So what can we do to change that approach? And you guys, I like the work you're doing. But again, professionals are not in that conversation. People with money are not in that conversation. I'm not. I'm a professional. I have lots of money. I spend lots of money. But the conversation should include all of us. Because the system, the masses may be low socioeconomic people. But there's a whole lot of people in there who are not on the low socioeconomic level, who got trapped or got targeted and ended up in a plea agreement situation, which ought to be reversed if in fact more information comes out. And I hear your opinion. Thank you for the time.
You know, Dr. Brown, I'm for saying I have to give some generalities, but we all know what we're talking about here. I think what you are describing is something that exists only in, quite frankly, imaginary places, but we know it's applied to real life circumstances, that being conditional right and conditional wrong. To me, if something is wrong yesterday, it should be wrong tomorrow, it should be wrong today, and so forth, so having. Unfortunately, while we may agree on this principle, the law does not. The only thing that we can do as citizens, as concerned citizens, is taking the foundational principle that a reverend said, which is being, present and participatory advocates, but also having to vote. We have laws that are in place that don't necessarily benefit the majority of our community, or is applied in a manner that is not, as we say, fair. As far as for an answer to that question, I'm aware of the circumstances. I wish I had a solution. If I did, I would give it to you. What I do know is that the law, unfortunately, this is on much lower scales. The law, unless it's explicitly stated, cannot be retroactively applied, which is why the judge told you that in addition to when plea bargains are entered into, a lot of times what happens, so in your case, you didn't go to prison, you entered a plea, there was, other things that had to be, conditions that had to be satisfied. You satisfied those conditions because it wasn't about that. By doing that, essentially, that executed that judgment. And once the judgment was fully executed, under the laws, guys, there's nothing to reverse or overturn, which is why they say it's ironclad. I believe that while that is a current legal principle, God willing in our lifetime, that will be something that is changed to be more equitable. What we have otherwise is a law that, as it is applied, results in an outcome, but does not result in justice.
Can you speak to an alphabet?
Sorry?
Can you speak to an alphabet?
Yes, sir. So an alpha plea essentially would be where the person does not admit guilt, but they wouldn't be looking to dispute or contest the actual factual basis of the charge. Very similar to a no contest, but it's a guilty plea. Alpha pleas historically have been used in a multitude of ways. However, if you look at how they have played out, I think alpha pleas actually have become a shield for subsequent where people later on, let's say for example, try to assert maybe a civil claim, and then the opposing side leans on that alpha plea, if that makes sense. It is a situation that's supposed to allow people to maintain, and I'm talking about in the general sense, supposed to allow people to maintain innocence without disputing the factual assertion of the basis of those charges. But I believe that while people may initially see it as a protective cover, eventually it becomes something that is difficult to overcome. Have you ever heard of alpha plea meaning was wrong? Me neither. And I guess that's what I'm saying, for lack of a better word. Generally speaking, a plea. So we're talking about pleas. Pleas on all levels have to be knowingly, voluntarily, and intelligently made. Okay? Meaning that someone who enters the plea has to understand the nature of the circumstances of the charges, they have to understand the basis of those charges, they have to also understand the rights that they're waiving by entering that plea, and understanding all those things still agree to move forward with the plea. If in fact any one of those things is missing, then the plea was not willingly, voluntarily, intelligently made, which means that it was not taken. It should be allowed to be withdrawn. Understanding all those principles, I've never known of an alpha plea to be withdrawn.
I just wanted to say, I see the issue that you have. I'm sorry to get that off the ground. I think a big problem with our system, I say all the time, prosecutors are the most powerful people in our country. They really are more powerful than judges. They get to choose what charges they are, when they bring them, what kind of offer they're going at, how hard they're going, object to people getting out, making offers, agreeing to get people out. I mean, they have all say so in those circumstances like that. It is tough in many circumstances, especially where it's stay strong. I think that's a big problem with our system, this how much power they have. When in the end, the judges should have the power and be able to dismiss cases or lower charges or something along those lines. I think there should be more power granted to judges because prosecutors also have way too much. I just want to say that.
How can we get that?
How can you
Legislation.
That's what
So one of my questions, I was kind of going back to, that was my question. So, for the master about basically do something, could that be a ballot initiative dealing with the issue that he's talking about? Could that be something that was ballot, collect signatures, and have it be a ballot?
a ballot initiative to like withdraw pleas after. Is that what you're asking?
Well, that would be great, yeah.
Maybe to reopen.
Oh, prosecutorial powers, are you asking?
You're right.
So, I mean, it could probably be a ballot initiative in some way, shape, or form. But just imagine the pushback when you're trying to get this out to the votes to say prosecutors have too much power, things along those lines. I mean, you get the people out, you get the signatures, you get everything together to change the justice system, not just in Ohio. It's probably pretty consistent across the United States. That's going to be a process. I mean, you can't. I mean, it was hard to get it here, maybe, and figure it out in this state. I mean, plea negotiations kind of switch things up. I mean, if you look back in the day, pleas were this primitive or like just so huge. I mean, like 95% of cases probably lean towards pleas. So, and the judges have no say. I mean, they can stop pleas from happening as
say, because I think what it's getting down to, what would be, or what do you think would be the percentage of African Americans that were, took a plea deal and were found guilty versus if they obtained a lawyer? What do you think the difference would be? Somebody who had a lawyer and was found guilty versus somebody who took a public defender and found guilty. I think that's kind of where you're going at.
Yes, we were.
Okay.
So, private counsel versus public defenders, what you're saying, somebody that pay for it. In this county, it's probably different. I mean, I'm not saying all of them, I'll be honest. There's some public defenders I wouldn't want to represent me. But in the end, there's a lot of them in our office that are really good. I mean, we help train appointed counsel. I mean, we started a trial school down at UD a few years ago. We trained 60, 70 attorneys every year on how to do trials. I mean, they call us on case law, they call us on issues, they run things past us. So I think when it comes, but then there's private counsel that are awesome, there's private counsel that are not good. I think in the end, that's a hard question to answer because there are some good ones and there's some bad ones, either way you look at it.
Who was suffering the most? What entity is suffering the most from some of these
If you would define, I guess, suffering, if you say suffering means they're found guilty,
Yes.
I would almost piggyback off of what Mr. Bailey said. I can't tell you how many public defenders or private counsel I've had that I've heard. I can tell you that there are some extremely skilled attorneys that work in the public defender's office and or that are private counsel. And maybe go back to I do think that as far as for the second answer to your question, even though they are related, I do not believe that they are reliant upon each other. There are people who receive great representation from public defenders and people who receive great representation from private counsel and vice versa. Oftentimes, the second answer to your question, the people who are affected most in the criminal justice system are those who are entrapped in the cycle of poverty. And so in our community, that normally signals black, brown, and poor white individuals who live in predominantly poverty-stricken areas. And so the majority of the people who are found guilty just by the design of, whether it be through gerrymandering, redlining, other types of illness. Don't also forget superfunds. Nobody ever talks about the impact of superfunds and environmental justice concerns have on our community. When you talk about the quality of food, quality of water, and other types of basic necessities and needs, those things also factor in. But even if you put all those to the side, the majority of the people who we're talking about are still black.
No statistics are kept. That's what I'm getting at. You know, who is mostly affected?
Oh, it would be black and brown. The statistics now we're talking about local or let's say front level statistics. The same figures, the same all throughout the country that being the majority black and brown. I think that those statistics could be broken on the sides in different ways, but I think that to your point, the point I'm really trying to make, at the end of the day, if you lay it all out, you're still going to see the same commonalities. We're going to see places that are poverty stricken. We're going to see places that are associated with food debtors, or places that are associated with a high level of literacy, or job loss, or homelessness, where we're going to see the highest concentration. And throughout the country, those are the same in being black and brown people. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm really intrigued by the jury of your peers. And at a county level, I know when I worked for General Division, we pulled juries from the B&B. And of course, at a county level, you're going to get a wide range. So you're not necessarily getting a jury of your peers. And Mr. Daly, do you know, can they target a specific demographic based on the defendant to make sure that they get a jury of their peers? Because somebody maybe from Washington Township, Centerville, if they're pulling from that area, somebody may not get a fair.
So I believe the court's in the rule within this now. I want to say, Magistrate McLean brought up earlier that he asked juries at the Pierce and Dayton. City and Dayton juries are so much better than county.
Yeah.
Now, my fiance, she's a public defender also. She had a murder case a couple weeks ago, African American defendant, and 14 white people, 12 and 2 alternates. 14 white people that convicted him after 9 hours of a murder and self-defense. I mean, I'm not going into the facts or anything, but who's right, who's wrong. Black defendant, white complaint. I mean, it's the county juries. I mean, people just don't show up. I don't know. DMV, they're trying to think of a better way. I mean, other jurisdictions, because it's hard. If you look across the country, people are trying to figure this out in other courts too. Some people are offering more money. If you get paid $10 a day to go be a juror, it's insane. How many people can come down that's not in the Oakwood and Washington Township and just take a week or two off of work for $10 a day? And, you know, a lot of people in the suburbs, their work will pay, you know, the additional pay on top of the $10 and what they would have made if they were at the jury duty, you know, so they pay all their income. You know, a lot of places down here in City Day, they don't pay any extra, so you have to be able to work for a week or two, you need to find childcare, you need to find all this stuff, it's just not possible. So, I mean, there's studies going on across America right now, how to make it better, how to make a better jury that appears, a different variety of just ideas and perspectives and, you know, everything. I mean, that's what it's all about, is trying to get a variety of people there. And it's the way it's set up is just tough. When it comes to BME, I mean, that includes the most people because it not only has driver's licenses and state IDs and looks like all of them, but I think the main thing, you got to show up. You got to show up. You got to promote people showing up. You got to promote how big it is. I mean, we've had juries in the past where it's been 11 white people and 1 African American, and it was a hung jury because that 1 African American had a different perspective on what the heck is going on. I mean, so just getting your voice out there and letting people hear what's going on is important, but I don't know a better way than B&B, but there's got to be a better setup that people don't lose their livelihood because they have to go down and do it.
Can you, when you're picking your jury and you see that it's not going to be a jury of their peers, is there something you can do about that?
There's objections. The problem we fall back on right now is they have a process that can be determined, you know, taking the B&B numbers. It's not racially biased.
Yeah.
But you're not the one that's choosing that.
What's that, sir? Sorry?
You're not choosing. You're not choosing. The judge is not choosing.
It's all B&B
See, that's what I'm saying. You know, so
And it's computerized, so it's this random draw, but they're pulling their data from the BMB.
Right.
Instead of, I think they used to do the Board of Elections, but that,
They changed it.
yeah, they changed that back to the BMB, but it's just not pulling people. So when you go to trial, you only get so many objections, right?
No, I can object.
Oh, you can object. Okay, I thought you only.
You
Okay.
know what challenge?
Yes.
Oh, challenge.
Challenge. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, there's some ways they're just random. I mean, there is, and it's the luck of the draw on who shows up. I mean, even once you show up, like it could be all the minorities in the back that are never even going to make it all the way up there. It's random selection on that too. So, but Dayton juries are so much more of a representative community than the county
Yeah.
juries.
Before going to the State House, I was a bailiff, and I know exactly what they're talking about. I would only ask you, it's open public view. Go down to the courthouse, watch the jury selection so you see what they're talking about. Because some people automatically said, well, I can't come to jury duty. I work at the White Pack, and we're essential services, or for some dumb reason. And but as they point out, there are other exemptions, right, or you can preempt them from being on the jury. But I say go down and watch it. It's a public opportunity for us to see what's going on. Whatever, and I would say find out from magistrate or from Tim O'Connell or others, you know, when the judges do their first plea or come before the judge, just to watch that process. Again, I just simply want to say to you, what goes on in the courthouse is public view. Anybody can go down and look and see what's going on.
Show up. It's so many different layers that I was having a conversation. I feel like a lot of times, even though you may have someone, let's say 5 is thick, it could be a phone book, old phone book, right? Everything is electronic now. It could be an old school phone book, very thick. It doesn't matter because oftentimes when you talk to that person, what you realize is that they only been judged. Nobody ever tried to hold them accountable. People just seen them for what they were accused of, what they did, as opposed to who they could be. And when you start having this conversation with folks, you discover, they had been, getting traumatized since childhood, or, they come from a situation where they dealt with, dependency issues their whole life. And the stories go on and on and on. And I feel like that, a lot of this that we have that goes on in the system because people are responding to how they are treated. They aren't treated like a human being. They're treated like an animal, so they're not responding like a human being. They're responding just like how they're treated. And so I feel like that, if we can find ways in the system and outside the system to be more human to each other, to be more relatable, and to give people grace, no pun intended, I think we'll come out a lot better. Come on, man. He said preach.
Anybody else? Because we ready to close this shop. We already tired of speaking hungry. Go ahead.
Even after the fact, probably the biggest problem that nobody talks about enough are the sanctions that you face once you go through the system. If there are any rules made, there are like 2,700 sanctions in the house once you've been convicted of the And of course, nobody, so you never become a first class citizen. Because you are aware of any efforts made to decrease that, elected by legislation or what's
So, if collateral consequences is what you're saying?
collateral consequences,
So, it affects housing, it affects licenses, it affects ability to go to college, it affects mental. Actually, there's an Ohio website that you can put in charges for state crimes on what the collateral consequences are going to be, and they're enormous.
yeah.
They're enormous.
27.
I mean, pleads guilty, I mean, that's what people don't get. I mean, you don't know how many times I've heard if they plead guilty, I let them out. People take that all the time. If they set the trial with them for maybe another month or 6 months or something along those lines. They don't understand the collateral consequences at the time. I try to explain it as best as possible, answer their questions, but they're enormous.
So to address those, because that's otherwise, I was going to get those changed.
So, collateral consequence wise, they now Ohio is giving credit for what this legislature has been doing. For credit that they did do is they're allowing more charges to be sealed and more charges to be expunged. After a certain time period, the public defenders actually helps do that. So when people reach out to us, we can help them seal and expunge their crimes that they were convicted of. Juvenile wise, the court's pretty good. And if people have a juvenile record, all it takes is a phone call or like walking down to the court, there's a phone to pick up to get your expunged. You have to do it. I mean, the prosecutor's office lately is starting to charge weapons under disability for stuff that happened as a juvenile. More and more now, it's making it mad. A lot of counties don't do it. A lot of counties automatically expunge juvenile crimes. The one I grew up with, all Grace County does that, it's automatically expunged. Here they don't, and they're starting to dig in juvenile charge people. It's like crazy. So, you know people with a juvenile history, all they got to do is go down to the court, grab a phone, and ask them to be expunged. If they're an adult, after so much time period, it depends on the level of charge, you can reach out to our office, we can help. That will restore a lot of collateral consequences, restore your rights and privileges.
Wow. This is exciting. 50 years ago, but anyway, 50 years ago, when Ohio changed to the law system that they have today, prior to that, they had a different system. 1975, they switched to the system that they have, which is a very interesting system because they got lesser included offenses within certain statutes. So if you go to aggravated murder all the way down to not made a lawful arrest on them. So, I mean, so it's all crazy. That's the reason why I like this plea bargain to me is very important. Because I have people come to my office all the time because they have either have to make a plea bargain or they are about to make one. And I had one just come the other day, he had made a plea bargain and wanted to know how he could get out of it. Remember, you need to get some attorney. But the only way that you can deal with a plea bargain, once you make that plea bargain, it's over, it's done. Except in extreme cases, if you have done some stuff in the court system prior to the plea bargain, then they can look at that. But once you make that bargain, it's over. And we got so many people going to jail, going to prison, who are not guilty. And it's quite psychologically, why would I be self-convicting myself? And that's what people are doing. They give it their Fifth Amendment rights. They give it their Sixth Amendment rights. They give it all their rights, mainly to the fact, like God saying, and like these great men here saying, because they, and I'm going to tell you what the problem is. They don't have the money. It's just that simple. They don't have the money. You know, when the American system is set up, if you don't have any money, you're not going to be ready to go to jail. When they come in our office, I tell them, say, look, you don't have the money, you get what you pay for. And a lot of them come to my office because of the fact that they are dissatisfied with their attorneys. 90% of them are always upset at their attorneys. And I say, you get what you pay for. And when you don't pay a lot of money, you don't have an attorney who's got an investigator who goes out and investigates. You don't have an attorney who's going to do all the kind of things, the motions that you need. And oftentimes you're not going to get the service that you deserve, maybe because you don't have the cash. In Dr. Brown's case, he had the money, but he didn't have the right stuff going for him because he was dealing with federal stuff. And lastly, the prosecutor. And I used to meet with prosecutors all the time. I would take cases to them, and they review the cases. And that's where the bargaining chips are doing right now. I mean, at the end of the day, they basically do what the police officers tell them. Here, do this. And they like it. But I'm telling you, last thing I want to say, everybody in this room, I don't know who you are in this room, even these children, will be stopped one night by the police and locked up and put in jail and haven't done nothing. I'm telling you. Now, I tell this to people all the time. Y'all say the prosecutors are powerful. Most powerful people in America to be on police officers. They're the ones who have a gun and a badge. And they can determine whether you go to jail or don't go to jail, or they can determine whether you stay and be alive or not be alive. That's the power. It's the real power. So I'm glad you came out tonight. These gentlemen, Attorney Daly, Magistrate Brennan, and my new pastor,
I just want to add one thing to what Dr. Fox was saying. That we don't have money to go into jail and all of those things. And people subject themselves to this at the root of it because they don't trust us as a community to show it. If we thought for a second that somebody was going to show up, I would not jeopardize everything. Somebody was going to show up on my behalf. Or just show up to be honest. I'd be a good jury. Right? If I think you're guilty, I'm going to vote guilty. I'm just being honest with you. If my looking at the facts and hearing everything suggests to me that you're guilty, that's what I'm going to say. But if it says to me that you're innocent, or they prove to me that you're innocent, or I have to use my life experience to help me make the judgment, I'm going to trust that because that's what I know. That's what I know. Give me 2 seconds. Let me share this last story.
what we call testimony. From individuals who are part of this criminal justice system. And first of all, let's give it up for Chairman Fox for putting something together. And let's give it for our distinguished panelists who educated us. So with that being the case, next month in this same room, our conversations will be centered around community coordination. Except it's not going to be on Monday, because Monday of next month is Memorial Day. So it's going to be on Tuesday, May 27th. It's going to be our next general membership meeting day. So it's going to be community coordination. The chair of our community coordination is Vice President Maddie White. So she will be chairing that particular session. Don't know what the topic will be, but we'll have it for you in short order, and it'll be out on our website. If you want to review this, and you want to listen to this, you think this would be beneficial to other individuals, you can go to our website, naacpdating.org, naacpdating.org, and you'll be able to view this video once again, or tell your friend, your neighbor, who may be facing some of the same challenges that the educators on tonight, about what they can do. Please send them to our website. It'll be up by the end of this week, and they'll be able to watch this educational forum and be educated, thereby empowered to make a better decision. So until the next time, may the Lord bless you. May the Lord bless the NAACP. May the Lord bless the United States of America. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.